Welcome to another episode of Insights from the Trenches, a series dedicated to helping ADHD couples thrive by empowering couples with insights from ADHD experts and ADHD peers. I'm Alice, your host. In today's episode, I speak with Jonathan Hassall from Down Under, an ADHD partner, an ADHD coach, and happily married for 35 years, about adapting and thriving in an ADHD marriage. So grab a cup of coffee and let's thrive together. All right, John, nice to see you today. It's been a while, but I'm so glad that we get to chat today. Can you introduce yourself and your ADHD journey?
Sure. And lovely to see you again. My name is Jonathan Hassall. I'm based in Brisbane in Australia. I coach people all over the world. I'm an ADHD coach. I have ADHD. I was diagnosed at 46 years of age. I am married. I've been married to the same person for 35 years, and she's wonderful. And she's also an ADHD coach. We got 3 kids, 3 wonderful, wonderful kids. Yeah, well, they're very grown-up kids now. Basically, my journey is that I had no idea I had ADHD. I belonged to a very high-performing family, and with different attributes too. Like, I had a brother that was very academic, another brother who was a musician, and another brother who's a wonderful, practical, smart guy who builds and can pretty well do anything he puts his mind to. And I had parents that were academic, and I grew up in that thing, and I should have been good at it. And I sort of was at times and wasn't at times. And so, but I grew up with this, and this was just me being me. Went to uni, was looking at political science, ended up in nursing somehow, accidentally. Sort of loved nursing for a while, but then realized I wanted something more, moved into developing health programs in mental health, and moved towards hospital, sort of more hospital organization management roles. Then left there and went into pharmaceuticals. And in pharmaceuticals, I worked in mental health and mental health area. Eventually ended up in a role as the scientific advisor for ADHD for Australia and New Zealand for one of the pharmaceutical companies. Now, as part of that role, I had to figure out why our drug was a bit different, because our drug was atomoxetine, which I still say is a wonderful drug, but was before its time. The thing that struggle we had with atomoxetine was the study said it should have been better than it was appearing to be in practical use. So I had to become an expert on executive function very, very quickly, because the standard core symptoms were not giving us the answers we needed. And so I did. And so this is probably about 20 years ago now. People like the wonderful Professor Barkley were already talking about executive function in great detail. In fact, if anyone wants to get their head around it, I strongly encourage reading one of his earlier books from 2012 about what executive functions are. It's a wonderful book. I love it. But so in the process of that, I sort of realized, wait a minute, a lot of these symptoms look like me. And I remember I was at a conference in London, and I happened to be standing around with some senior people who knew me in passing. I just heard a talk on the positive aspects of ADHD, and I thought, wow, that sounds like me. Like a lot of those things I affiliate with. And I just happened to mention it over coffee to a couple of people. And they all sort of started giggling and said, oh, Jonathan, we thought you knew. You're very ADHD. And I went, wow, really? So I did I think I did Ned Hallowell's assessment on the way out to Heathrow Airport in a black cab, had a little cathartic moment, realized, oh my God, this is my life story. And then we got diagnosed at 46, much to everyone's amusement, I might say, in the kindest possible way. And then I finished working in that role and realized that there was this thing called ADHD coaching. And when I first met an ADHD coach, I'll be honest, coming from a clinical and scientific side, I thought, oh, yeah, it's a lot of fluffy stuff. I met a wonderful ADHD coach. I think the only formally trained one in Australia at the time, Michelle Toner. Within 5 minutes of talking to her, I said, oh, my God, you're the missing piece. You're the bit that we don't do. And it was like I had a seismic shift in my awareness then. So I went and trained through ADCA, in the States, wonderful ADCA, met some wonderful people that I still are in peer review with and keep in close contact with, and some of the great coaches in America at the moment. Of course, my wife trained as well, Monica. And I should say Monica and I have been married for 35 years this year. Well, actually, technically end of last year. She's not ADHD, but she's what we call ADHD adjacent. Her entire family has very strong traits of ADHD. So, so that's where I'm now. So now here I am, 11 years into a coaching practice with a fantastic relationship. This is what gets me out of the bed in the morning. When I stopped working with like other mental health areas like schizophrenia, bipolar, depression, and all of those can be treated to varying degrees. Someone said, "Why do you love ADHD so much?" And this was even before I realized I was ADHD, before I'd let that sink. I said, "But it's so addressable. You can take a child with ADHD, and with a little bit of change in the way you interact with that child, you can dramatically change their trajectory. And most importantly, their experience of life and who they are. And as an adult with ADHD, I don't care when you get diagnosed, if you take the time to understand it, and the resources are out there, you work with someone to really internalize what that means, you can hit potential you knew was always there, but you hadn't been hitting. You can dramatically change your life. ADHD is not this sentence of being broken or damaged, unless we let it. So that's my story.
That's great. So I know you have this ADHD coaching practice, and I learned from you that you focus on ADHD couples.
Mm-hmm.
How did you decide, and why did you decide to focus on working with ADHD couples?
Well, so I've always worked. I've worked with every age group of ADHD and every place, and even though I know that there's this tendency towards niching your practice, I've always been a bit broader than that. So it's always been adults. So I work with uni students. I work with individual adults. I do work-focused stuff. I do emotional-focused stuff. But the relationship stuff came out of because I had people that were struggling in their relationships. So the other big passion of mine with ADHD is ADHD and emotions. And I did a talk for, I think it was the first COVID conference, the International Conference on ADHD. I did a talk on ADHD and emotions. It was sort of a pretty natural connection with that sort of bias in my focus.
Got it. Good to know that you actually coach across adults at different stages, but certainly there's some uniqueness to ADHD couples, because it just by necessity, it seems like. So what is the secret in thriving in an ADHD relationship?
Well, I think the secret is to understand that the first focus needs to be on how we adapt to each other. It's not about fixing the ADHD. That's a journey for the person with ADHD to undertake, and that's their responsibility. As a couple with ADHD, the first thing to understand is that this unseen feature in our relationship means we're often hearing different things to what our partner is saying, which means that we need to be aware of how it's changed each of us and how we can address how we're misinterpreting each other and misunderstanding how each other's functioning. Because as soon as we do that, it clears a whole pile of rubbish out of the way so we can solve problems together.
Can you give us an example of how we mishear from our partners all the time?
Yeah. So if we think about it, I often start couples off by talking about how we got here. And I tell a little story that we started off in love and accepting, and our differences were all exciting and wonderful. And then we started to notice that sometimes, one partner will notice the other partner is not doing something that they thought they had agreed to do. So the first solution is, I'll just be corrective. Obviously, it's an information gap, because with a neurotypical viewpoint, that's probably what the problem is. So I'll just tell them what happened. And they're fine, and we're all in love, and it's all good. So they say, yeah, 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 yeah. And so they're motivated to work on it. And so you'll see some improvement in that performance because people with ADHD are not silly. They know how to do stuff. So in effect, what's happened is the partner's just reminding them. Now, they think they've been informing them. Now, then it seems to happen again. The same problem. Let's say it's, I don't know, something simple like taking out the rubbish bins. They forget again after a time. So the other partner thinks, oh, okay, information was enough. Maybe I need to be more directive, which is almost where we start to branch into being parental. I need to tell you, this obviously you're not getting something, so I'm going to tell you something more. And I might even try and problem solve, all with the best intentions. Now, the person with ADHD will probably start to chafe a little bit at being told how to do something, but will concede that they have my mistake, I should have done it. Over time, though, when it keeps being inconsistent, the partner will start to challenge the motivation or the intention behind the act. In which case, they'll look at them and say, well, you can remember to do things that you find interesting and exciting. You can remember to do things. If I get really upset, you remember to do it. You jump to doing it. What's that tell me? That tells me that, well, maybe you just don't care about it because I want it unless I get upset with you enough to make you do it. Meanwhile, the person with ADHD is sitting there thinking, wow, why are they writing me about this thing? Like I meant to do it. Something, and classic ADHD, I meant to do it, but I don't know why it didn't happen. I meant for it to happen. So, because, they're missing systems to make it happen. So then suddenly it becomes almost often an oppositional relationship. Either the person with ADHD gets ground under, or they start to say, no, to hell with you. Well, and they'll start making reasons why they shouldn't take the bins out and that sort of thing. So you end up in this big oppositional conflict. In that case, the big thing that is being misheard and misunderstood from the partner's perspective, they are misunderstanding the difference between intent and action. With ADHD, we generally have good intentions or the right intentions. Problem is that the actions aren't as reliable. We can talk about that at length. The other side of it is, if we're misreading our partner's attempts to help us, and they're only becoming more prescriptive because they're not, or even to the point of being demonstratively upset, they're only going that way because they're not getting out. They don't feel like they're getting our attention. They don't know. They're running out of resources. They're running out of tricks to help us. That's where we're mishearing each other. We're completely misreading both the intent and the ability of each other to solve that problem.
Yeah, thank you for that example. That makes a lot of sense. What is the key for the ADHD couple to do in order to adapt and thrive then?
Right. Well, see, this is where I think we need to go back to basics, because let's remember we've assumed a whole pile of things, and those things we've been training each other into these reactive behaviors. Often when a partner complains about, either the person with ADHD or the person without ADHD complains about the other partner's behavior or something, the first thing I ask them is, how did you train them into doing that? And it was not intentional training, but it was still training. So there's an ownership of, again, it's back to how we're both failing to adapt. So the first step is we've got to create a whole new foundation. Now, we can keep the relationship, that's fine. We can keep all the bits we love about each other, but we got to go back to saying, wait a minute, I have been misinterpreting the way you've been thinking this whole time. So we have to start with a new basis of understanding. And the first thing we got to do is we got to relearn how to listen to each other, because the experience of ADHD is remarkably different in many ways, in some ways similar, but many ways remarkably different from the person who doesn't have ADHD. To the point that when I'm coaching people, very often both partners will say at some point, oh, I had no idea you thought that way. Oh, why would you think that? They're stunned that would be the natural thought process that went with it. But that's where we start. We start with a new foundation of, hey, we actually don't understand how each other thinks. Let's rebuild from there. Let's be open to listening and understanding. Let's make it our first port of call. Rather than, hey, you didn't do something, now I'm upset with you. Let's start with, wow, you didn't do something. I assume your good intent. So let's figure out, help me understand what got in the way. Or you keep chasing me about something. I don't understand why you keep doing that. Let me understand why you keep chasing me about that thing.
Mm. So it's like being curious
Yeah.
instead of assuming that they didn't do something on purpose.
Yeah, exactly. Because it all comes back to this idea of intent. And this is probably the critical thing we've got to get past right at the outset, is that intent does not always equal action with ADHD. In a neurotypical world, action more often fulfills intent. So, there's sayings like, actions speak louder than words and all that sort of thing. Well, in ADHD world, we're in the upside down. Intent is who we are. And with everyone out there with ADHD, you hang on to that intent. You speak loud and strong and say, the intent is who I am. The action has failed. That's not who I am. There's no shame or blame in that for me. I will solve that action. But let's be clear, the intent is who I am.
Got it. Being curious, ask question instead of assuming. That's good to know. So, what do you recommend as an exercise that couples can do to learn this new way of talking?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so first off, I have a little exercise I call Connect Time. It's based on the old, the talking stick, or if I've got the ball, I've got the floor sort of idea, but it's the full extension of it. So the full extension of is that if I'm speaking, I have a responsibility to continue to adapt how I'm explaining something until I feel you understand me. So if I ever say, I've told you 30 times, then I'm failing. Okay. And, we can think about this very often with kids. There's an old saying that if you've told a kid to do something 1,000 times and they still don't do it, it's not the kid that's got the problem. It's you. You haven't adapted your language to the child. So we've got to be aware, then that's not to say that people with ADHD are children, but it's to say that we've got to keep adapting our language. If what we're saying is not getting through, we have to keep thinking, well, how do I reframe that for the other person's awareness? For the listener, they have the responsibility of continuing to listen without agenda. So active listening, that means paraphrasing, probing questions, confirming statements, all without their own agenda or solutions or anything else until the speaker feels heard. And I encourage people to check in, say, do you feel like I heard you? And you'll know when you hear each other, because often you get like these goosebumps. And it's most likely oxytocin and serotonin being released because you're getting that connection. So that's I call it Connect Time, but it's just a more expansive version of other communication models. But then the secret is, this is the big secret, Alice, you have to do it every day. So it will be new. It will feel clunky. You will feel like you're putting on airs, like you're pretending. But you need to do it every single day as a couple. And you need to do it with simple stuff. Don't do it with all the big, deep, dark problems that you've ever had. Ideally, you will be able to use it for that in the future. But start with, how did you sleep, honey? And when they tell you, really seek to understand what their experience of their sleep was and what it meant to them. Ask them, how was your day? One of the things we do in our house to effectively train all of us in this process is every night at dinner we do highlight of the day. And notice, no lowlights, just highlights. Lowlights will emerge by themselves. Highlights you ask for. So we get people to focus on what we appreciated in our day, and we pass it around the table one to another. You have to listen. It is a massive faux pas in our house. If you ask someone twice for their highlight of the day and they've already done it, then that means you weren't listening the first time around. So we listen and we really seek to understand we have a conversation about that highlight. That's a really great way of doing it. It's a great way of teaching your children to do it in a really healthy way too.
That is so true. The practice on things that you are not getting upset on, something simple,
Yeah.
it's really great because it helps you get a grasp of the exercise without taxing yourself with every emotion and thought that is in your head. So as you do it, it really does make sense. If you do it every day, just once a day, have that small conversation, you will learn. and then it becomes second nature in your conversation. And that
Exactly.
also helps you, I think, get to your point about building that trust, because
Yeah,
now you at least feeling heard, or both are feeling heard, so that you can now build trust and
yeah.
build a new level of trust.
Exactly. And just for everyone's awareness who's listening to this, every couple I coach, I always do this as the first thing we do after we talk through the differences. But it's the first exercise we do. And I will tell you that the people who go and do it, I can tell within minutes of the next session whether they've been doing it or not, because their relationship has already shifted. They've still got the same issues. They've still got things they've got to sort out. This person with ADHD still has to sort out their stuff, but they are in a different place when they come back. And if they haven't, I can see it. And where a lot of couples fall into the trap of is A, they don't do it every day because it feels a bit weird. It feels a bit put on. But the other thing too is they use it just to talk about logistics. They think, oh, just as long as we talk about what's planned for the week with the schools and work and who's going to make dinner and all that sort of stuff, then that's it, and that's not it. If you have not really seen through the eyes of your partner, seen their experience, and had them confirm, yeah, that's it, that's what it felt like, then you have not done it. So that's the big trick to be aware of.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I can attest to that. You have to start something small, and then build that practice over time. Maybe you can't do it every day. Maybe you're very busy, but in my case, we did it every weekend, every Saturday, first thing in the morning. That's what we do. We practice,
Yeah.
and
Well,
then
I mean, that's a minimum, but I would
yeah.
attest. Well, I mean, are you too busy for divorce court? Because we
I
are
get you.
very. You got to remember, we are very good at saying everything outside in the world is more important than us. And if I'm happy in my relationship, I am 10 foot tall and bulletproof. I never feel better than when I know that I'm completely in sync with my wife, and I hope she feels the same way too. So that is worth all the money in the world. My children are happier when we're happy. They're certainly not happy if we're not happy with each other. I would say, and again, I tell couples is let's not mince around this. Do this every day. Find the time, make the time. There will be time when you're looking at your phone, or when you're watching something on TV, or you're standing in the kitchen making lunches, ignoring each other, where you could be connecting. And let's not forget that the immediate payback on this is you get to fall in love again. You know, we get caught up in relationships talking about logistics of communication and trust and all these things are really important. But the goal here is to be in love. And I mean in love. And, you know, for example, that's one of the choices. I have a thing of visualizing my day before I get out of bed. And because I drag myself out of bed and my wife's usually up, the first thing I do is I visualize who I want to be for in my life that day. I visualize who I want to be for my clients, who I want to be for my son and my daughters, and their partners, and who I want to be for most importantly, my wife. And with my wife, it's really simple. I just ask myself one question: do I choose to be in love today? Because it's a choice. Now, all I've got to do is decide yes. And I will admit, I don't do that every day, because some days I'm being a little bit of a pain. But most days I choose to be in love. And when I do, it changes who I am with her. And she'll notice. She will respond, and she'll be affectionate back to me, and it'll just be little things. I'll be more mindful about her needs, and changes, you know, the dynamic of the day.
I got it. So do it every day, not like me, do it every week, because it takes a lot longer, and I can attest to that. So do it every day if you want results. And yes, your marriage is worth it for you to put that 10, 15 minutes a day just to practice this. Then it gets super easy because it becomes second nature soon enough. You can just do this very quickly and start moving into more complex conversations.
Yeah,
Sure.
well, I mean, and just to attest that, let me tell a little story. One of my earlier couples that I coached, they had 4 kids, and there were challenges with finances, challenges with work, challenges with extended family, and they were not getting on. And they came back after doing this for a couple of weeks. And I said, how were things? And I knew they'd had a big family reunion thing over the weekend. And I said, how was the reunion? And they said, oh, everybody was cranky with us. And I said, why? And they said, because we were annoying them, because we were like teenagers in love. We were sitting there whispering to each other and giggling and giving each other winks across the table and stuff like that. And we lay in bed talking for hours, and we kept everyone else up. But it was talking about nice things. And they said, we forgot what it felt like to be in love. And that's what we're in here for.
That is so true, because staying in love requires work. Once you get married, people think, oh, it should just be so natural because this person should know me. And we make that assumption and forgot to work on it. So
exactly
10, 15 minutes a day, keep you in love. Well, thank you, Jonathan. Before we go, tell people how they can reach out to you if they want to work with you.
Fabulous. Well, I'm at connectadhd, all spelt the normal way, .com. You can go to a website there. You can see what I do there. You can also see I do a lot of speaking, as does my partner, Monica. I'm also speaking at the International Conference for ADHD online edition in March. So if you want to see me, you can hear me there.
Thank you again so much, John. This has been an awesome conversation.
Thanks, Alison. Thanks for all the great work you do for this.